Hi, everybody. My name is Ron Robertson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Picmonic, and I am joined today for the Mastering Medicine webinar series by our honorary guest, Dr. Marc Katz.
Thank
Mark,
you
how
for
you
having
doing?
me.
Absolutely.
Good.
Glad you could join. Dr. Marc Katz, currently based out of you're in residency at Drexel for internal medicine?
Yes, sir.
Well, so, the point of this webinar series is we have a lot of users around the country who ultimately, just like you and I at one point in time, they have a lot of questions about medical school and the journey, right? From first year to second year, third year, fourth year, how do you get into residency?
So I think the toughest part in med school, which I struggled with the most, was keeping up.
Yeah,
Uh, it's just a complete different strategy of how you study because it's also a different mentality of in undergrad where I might just memorize and then purge. Like after
yeah,
the final, you're like, oh, don't need that information anymore. That you can't do that. You can't afford to learn something multiple times because at the end of the day, you need to learn it and not just remember it, but understand it
right.
because those concepts build on everything. You know, what you learn in first semester, you have to build on second, third, fourth, and in towards clinicals.
The
So I
the
think,
information compounds on itself. It
yeah,
really does. And it's one of those that if you can't remember something you learned first semester, you're going to get in trouble second semester, third semester, fourth semester, and let's call them semesters generically. But really,
yeah,
when it comes time for boards and step one, right? I mean,
yeah,
you're being tested on every single thing that you potentially learn in the first couple years of med school. So,
yeah.
so
So
when,
I mean,
when,
mhm.
yeah, go ahead.
I mean that was the toughest part for me was I mean we had I remember we had kind of a test or a quiz like the first week or the first month of med school because they know this that a lot of med students don't know how to study as they need to just yet. And I remember
Right.
just passing. I passed by like 1 or 2 points, and I freaked out because I didn't know again how to study and how to get those skills down.
Right.
Um, but I think one for me that was the hardest part was just adjusting to having to remember it and memorize it for long-term retention.
So let's talk about ultimately, there's a lot of information and now you need to retain it. So going into first year of medical school, that's a big change from what most students are used to. So what are some of the things that you did differently to adjust to that information retention? Was it how you approached the lectures and prepping beforehand? Was it what you did after a lecture? Was it, were there tools or resources that you used?
So really just getting the process down. And then using the right tools, whether it's Picmonic, I started using quite early, Pathoma, first aid, and using the resources repeatedly. Trusting in it. The more you use first aid, the more you realize how valuable it is. Likewise with Picmonic, I mean, I started using it when I was in my bugs and drugs section where it was back microbiology and we were learning all these different drugs and I could barely pronounce half of them, let alone remember their mechanism of action, adverse effect, all those things. So I think if you dedicate some time to your resources and use them consistently, it really pays its dividends. And then last thing was practice questions. Practice questions, not just to do them, but to find your deficiencies and then go study them. And that's the biggest thing that I carried with me into my step studying was studying, practicing, and applying my knowledge with practice questions, and then finding what areas I was weakest in, and then going back to study it. That's the game plan moving forward for step one, step two, and even into residency.
There were so many just golden tidbits that you just shared there, and some of them might have seemed like subtle, nuanced tips, but I want to try and break some of that apart real quick, just so we can hit it for the rest of the people. First off, some of the tools and resources that you used. I mean, between Pathoma, between first aid, between Picmonic, ultimately each one of those kind of plays into the studying process in a little bit different of a light, but it sounds like you leveraged up all those resources early on in from your first year. And I
Mm-hmm.
know, and I say that because I didn't buy first aid until my second year in med school. And so actually, and then I really didn't even start annotating it heavily till 6 months before. So I felt really
Yeah.
behind the game. Another one is question banks. I didn't buy a question bank until my second year of med school. Felt very, very far behind. So question banks, Picmonic, Pathoma, first aid, buying them early, practicing with them, using them, and trusting in them, that ultimately these are going to be powerful tools. That's kind of one thing that I really took away.
Yeah.
Another thing you said, and I think it's really interesting, is this idea that you practiced active recall, right? So it wasn't just about taking notes and then rewriting the notes or highlighting the notes over and over. This, because what we get into this mindset of, we can rewrite something or review it over and over, and we get this illusion of mastery where it's like we think we know it, but we really don't actually know it. So actually forcing yourself to fold over the paper, do flashcards, or do question banks, that process of active retrieval actually helps reconsolidate memory. So it's very, very powerful, but it's almost one of those that, again, didn't really have to do it in undergrad. So discovering that in med school, it sounds like that really helped you.
Yeah, I mean, just 100%. I mean, to me, one of the things that is evident in medical school and undergrad and in residency is that, as a comparison, it's obvious when someone is a great teacher and they're able to help you understand a concept. And that's a skill, it's a skill to be able to teach. And it's a skill that we don't really teach how to teach. And likewise, we kind of, at least in at Ross, they kind of actually had some seminars in to bring it back to med school and med students, is how to study, and that it's a skill that you have to develop just like anything else. If you want to get a better jump shot on the basketball court, you got to have a good system in place to in order to master that. And I think that studying is a skill that you have to work on and find what works for you. And some of those things are, for me, it was isolation, studying until I thought that I mastered it, or could attempt to meet up with a study group, and then go over it with each other and try to regurgitate it. And the best way that I found to be able to not just regurgitate it to myself was to teach it. And kind of that was part of my onus of why I became an anatomy teaching assistant, was because I knew that at the end of the day, sure, it looks good on my resume, but it also, you'd learn anatomy first year of med school. Some medical schools just do it first semester, and then you kind of don't really focus on that as much until you get back to it when you go onto your step exam.
Right.
So again, it's that active recall, actively keeping the knowledge fresh and retrievable, and just finding different ways to do that, whether it was through being a tutor for or a teaching assistant for the semesters before you, or finding resources like Doctors in Training, Picmonic, Pathoma, and whatnot.
That's great. That's great. Well, so let's talk about, I mean, ultimately everything that you start learning in your first year of med school really does build into the second year. So tell me though, as a second year student leading up to step one, what are some of the things that you either did well or didn't do well that you wish you would have done differently?
So, I mean, I think what was really interesting is that there was actually I forget what his name was, but the guy who has the world record for the longest run on Jeopardy, I think his name was Ron or something. Anyway, he wrote a book on how he remembered all these random facts. And I think that the concept was that if you want to memorize something, if someone gives you 3 random words that you have to remember, if you create a vivid image about it, that you will have a greater chance of remembering it long term. So I think that's what's beautiful about Picmonic, is that it does that so well. That being said, I couldn't jump into Picmonic until I kind of understood what was going on, because it's hard to memorize something if you don't understand it. So how I tried to approach step studying for both when I was in my first 4 semesters of med school, as well as when I eventually was solely studying for step 1, was learn the material, study it, and then come back to the Picmonic card, or later on after I cemented a little bit of my knowledge, and then use that to memorize those more esoteric facts and really cement it. Then do some practice questions, and then go back and the same process. Try to learn it, use the Picmonic card to memorize it and a little bit better, test and apply that knowledge, and then go back, see if you need to understand it, and then see, do I understand it but I just can't remember it, or do I not really understand it that well, and see what what resource would really be the best use of my time. But that being said, after I was done with my first 4 semesters, and Ross actually does an accelerated program. We do like the first 24 months in 18 months. So I had 2 months of dedicated step studying, and my routine every single day was wake up, go over some Picmonics, go over, read a few things that I struggled with the day before, do a full UWorld question set, eat lunch, relax, go over those questions, go over the Picmonics, go to the gym, eat, relax, go over the same stuff. So it's just the repetition and using a multi-pronged approach to understand and memorize whatever it is that you need to do.
So Picmonic was a resource you used for step one. Did it help? Did you feel like it actually helped you come step?
Oh, 100%. I wouldn't have passed med school if it wasn't for Picmonic. I mean, I know that you guys are with Picmonic, but that's, the God's honest truth. I remember even on step 2 CS, I think I was telling you the story earlier that I wanted to test a patient for pertussis, and I couldn't remember for the life of me how to do that. Like now it's just like, oh yeah, send the PCR. But all I could remember was the Picmonic card and the border Jenga piece of it, and I was like, Bordeaux-Genou auger, whatever, culture with Bordeaux-Genou auger, and I threw that into step 2 CS. I mean, maybe that's not why I passed, but I still use it.
Good. What did you use as far as question banks? It's a question we get constantly is, did you use Kaplan? Did you use UWorld? Did you use RX? And how many total questions did you do? Ultimately, when you think about what is the formula to success for scoring a 240 plus, from your perspective, what are the top 2 to 3 resources that you would prescribe?
Yeah, I mean, I've written extensively on my blog about this. I mean, UWorld at the end of the day.
Questions, lots of questions.
The question bank is, I mean, I wish UWorld would just write a book, because I ended up just like annotating all of UWorld into first aid. So first aid was my Bible. That was the epicenter of my studying. For step 1, I actually used Doctors in Training. I really liked that it just gave me an organized schedule. It didn't work for me as much for step 2, but I really liked it for step 1. So I used first aid as my primary like notebook.
Right.
Doctors in Training as kind of the overriding schedule and repetitive nature that allowed me to succeed. And then again, you got to do, there's no magic number, but you have to finish all of UWorld before you take step 1. If you don't, I think you're setting yourself up for failure, because you're not challenging yourself enough. Granted, UWorld is much harder, I think, than the real test. And sometimes the real test has really esoteric, stupid things that if I studied, for 10 years, I would have never gotten this random question right regardless. But, I think if I had to give you a strong answer, I would say I think I did about 3,500 questions total. That includes, I did a little bit of Kaplan when I was an anatomy TA in like my 2nd semester of med school. So I burned through like a lot of the anatomy stuff. And I didn't get through all of the Kaplan. I think I got through maybe half of it. And then I switched to UWorld. And then I did UWorld all over again. I did all of the questions that I got wrong.
That's great.
And that's on top of the 5 practice tests that, I would do over that time period. So I think 3,500 practice questions was my number that I got to.
Yeah, it sounds reasonable. I know students, on average, it sounds like these days the 4,000 question mark, which is, it's a lot. It's a lot of questions, but I mean, ultimately, if you're cranking through them and you start, earlier in your first year, if not, definitely early in the second year. But is there anything that looking back you would have done differently?
With regards to step 1 studying?
Yeah, prepping for step 1. I mean, ultimately, you did very well on the test, so.
I think my system was good. I liked the fact that I wasn't on a rotation.
Yep.
All I did for 2 months was study.
So 8-week dedicated step time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would have really changed was from the beginning, maybe I wouldn't have used UWorld, because I still think that's the gold standard, and that's I wouldn't start UWorld right first semester. I would still save that for when you're really cranking up into a higher gear
Right.
for step studying. But I would have maybe used Kaplan or some other question bank a little bit earlier,
Yeah.
first or second semester, to really show me because the value of the question banks isn't just testing your knowledge, but it shows you how the question makers of step one, step two are thinking, and how you should be thinking about these questions. So maybe I would have just used a formal question bank a little bit earlier in my studying.
That's great. That's great. Tell me, just on that note, is there anything else that you felt was, again, looking back, it's always when we look back, and I wish I would have known this or done this differently. Is there anything else that you would pay it forward as far as being successful in rotations? Thinking about interactions with either the people, the personnel, the accountability, the taking initiative. I know a lot of us are very shy going from, second year where it's all book work into the clinicals, and you're still at the bottom end of the totem pole, and you're surrounded by people who are all higher in the rank than you and know more than you, and we're all kind of timid. So what are some of those things that maybe you would pass on as far as?
Um, Nuggets of knowledge. At the end of the day, you're paying to be there. That always stuck with me, and that's why when I'm with my med students, I try to teach them a little bit, because as a medical student, I mean as a resident, I'm not paid much, but I'm paid to be in the hospital
Right.
and be there. You're paying to be there. Get the most of your money. It's really difficult,
I
and
love it.
it's easier said than done, but the more experience you have, the more patients you see, the better you'll get. That carries true with residency. So I think the biggest things that in clinical practice in third year, what I wish I was a little bit
Hmm.
better at was taking the initiative to see more patients, to practice those routines,
Right.
um, to get more knowledge and more experience under your belt. Um, and just, in the hospital, if you want to stand out, just be present. We're not attendings and residents and fellows know when you don't want to be there. I know when it's the fourth year of med school and you're going into urology or orthopedics, or neurosurge, and you're doing a sub-I in internal medicine and you just want to get out of there. I always tell my med students, like, if you just work hard, be present, and do your work while you're there, I'm fine with that. So and what I mean by that is, if you are on any rotation, try to take something out of it. Even if you're going into pediatrics or OB-GYN, you can learn something about blood pressure management from internal medicine. If you're in internal medicine, there's always something to learn. And at the end of the day, you might actually be the only person who's a doctor, regardless if you're a pediatrician. Someone might be having a heart attack in
You're
a
right.
random restaurant. So it eventually does come back to real life. So just try to learn something.
That's great. That's great. So let's say we've managed to get into medical school. We survived first year. We passed step one and hopefully excelled. We get into third year. We're cranking through clinicals and now into fourth year, right? So now it's really this transition in the next step of the journey and prepping for residency, and hopefully getting into a competitive residency. Tell me about what can students do to set themselves up for success in the residency and application process?
Um, fourth year is just, in every level of training, it just gets harder and harder. Except for fourth year. Fourth year is this magical time period where you like matched,
Yeah, you can
like
say.
that time after you match, but you're still in the hospital, is such a nice little treat. But in order to get to that point, at the end of the day, no matter what an attending or an advisor says, you need to, what we've been talking about, crush step one, crush step two. You need to, in order to stand out on paper,
Hmm.
and that is to just get you in your foot in the door, to get you past the filters of certain residency programs.
Right.
What will set you apart are really your letters of recommendation. When someone can vouch for you and say this person is going to be a great intern, I would take them in my program. And I think that ties back into how to do well on clinicals. Be interested, show your interests be excited to be there. It's so refreshing when you have a med student who's like excited to see the patient. And even if it's something that I like roll my eyes at, I'm like, oh, another asthma exacerbation, no big deal. But they're like so excited that they diagnosed it. It's refreshing to see. So getting those strong letters of recommendation really can set you apart.
Okay.
Your personal statement, just stay par. Don't try to get a hole in one. You do not need to be, just make your points and just don't let it hurt you. Because I've seen some personal statements that I like read and I'm cringing. I'm just like, do less.
Right.
So part of that is just don't shoot yourself in the foot. So crush your step exams, get good letters of recommendation. And the only other piece of your application is your CV or resume. So try to have some type of leadership role, whether it's a cardiology interest group or a few case reports that you publish with a resident or by yourself, or just being on a research project helps. And it won't guarantee you a residency spot. And it really depends if you're going for urology or neurosurge. The characteristics that they're going to be looking for are a lot different than if you're going through into pediatrics, psych, internal medicine. So you really have to be honest with what is expected of you, and then also just be honest with your application. If you have a 205 on step 1, it's not being mean, but it's just acknowledging your shortcomings, and you're going to have to compensate on step 2, or maybe if you don't do well on step 1 and step 2. Maybe mention that in your personal statement. So I think a part of this is also just being honest with your own strengths and weaknesses, and trying to just have a well-rounded application. The hobby section on your application is really just an opportunity for you and the attending or whoever you're interviewing with to not talk about medicine. It's crazy when you see it's awesome when you can be on an interview and talk about the game, if you think LeBron's going to be able to get to the finals again, and it shows that person that you have interest outside of medicine, that you can actually tolerate having this person be in your residency program for 3 to 5 years.
Hobbies, interests, relationships, things that are real life and do really matter at the end of the day. So it's really, really solid advice. I want to give you guys an opportunity to jump into the widget on this. You can ask questions to Dr. Katz, myself, Picmonic, and we're going to field a couple of those right now. So somebody right now out of the gates is giving you some significant props for your successes thus far, and also asking about your blog. So let's give a silent plug to your blog and talk about that just for a quick second. Why did you start it? What are you doing with it? Where's it going? 30 seconds, fast pitch.
Great question. At the end of the day, I truly believe that there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially in today's era. And that ties into the fact that you probably had patients, the amount of time that you have with a patient in an office visit is inversely proportional to the amount of education that you need to provide them. So I started my blog initially with the intent of ultimately using it as a tool to enhance my patients' understanding of their disease process and their health, so that eventually they can say, instead of, I saw on TV that I should stop taking this medicine because it might kill me, that, hey, I read this article from my doctor that said I shouldn't stop my medicine before I talk to you. So here I am asking about that. So I started it initially because I wanted to uncover the hidden curriculum of med school and residency, but I plan to continue to use it really for patient education and patient empowerment.
That's phenomenal. This is a great resource, and well done with that. Is there any other last piece of advice or tidbit you want to share? Otherwise, I'll go into some closing quick remarks, and we'll let you. I know you're a busy man, have lots to do, so I don't want to keep you much longer than we need to.
I guess my closing remarks are, at the end of the day, this is, everyone likes to focus on the step exams. Just realize that eventually when you get to residency, none of it matters. Not a single person in residency cares at all about what step scores you got. It makes no difference in the quality of doctor you are. Unfortunately, the reality is you need to do well, but on a more lighthearted note, just try to remember why you went into medicine in the first place. You know, sometimes that's the invigorating spirit that you need to hit the books a little bit harder, to remember why you want to do it, why you want to be a doctor in the first place. And sometimes that helps center me to get me back to the books when you're feeling a little bit burnt out. And at the end of the day, all the habits that you build as a med student carry with you to residency, fellowship, attendinghood. And I would just try to avoid the mentality of, you know, I'll exercise when I get a residency. It'll be easier then. I'll have a relationship. I'll, you know, get a puppy. I mean, I really want to get a puppy. Anyway, but try to build the life skills now and enact them, because it's never going to get easier. You're never going to have more time. Make time for the things that you care about, and you know, go save some lives.
I agree. The building in the habits and the disciplines early is hard, and we always think that we can kick that can down the road and take care of it later, but it's not easy to do. So, and I again just taking a quick peek at some of these last questions, but it looks like again more just thanks and props to Dr. Katz. So also wanted to give everybody a heads up. Number one, first and foremost, Dr. Katz, thank you so much for joining us, giving your time to share with the next generation of students. We truly appreciate it. On the flip side, thank you all for attending the webinar today and sharing this experience with us. To close this out, thank you all. We also, just as a quick aside, just to let everybody know, because I saw one other question being popped up here. We do just both webinars weekly, where we're inviting people, successful students, doctors, and owners of different companies to join us for the Mastering Medicine webinar series, as well as we'll give just quick webinar demos to some you and your friends or colleagues if you have questions about how to use Picmonic, integrating it in your class and studies. So just the kind of shameless plug there to Picmonic. But again, Dr. Katz, thank you for taking time. Good luck in the rest of your journey. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Good luck in yours as well, and we will see you again soon. All right, goodbye.